This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, tonight we're going to give you a treat. We're not going to talk about politics. We got one of the legendary men of the state of Alabama and state history, Dr. Karl Stegall, the legendary Methodist minister who's my longtime friend and a legend, an icon in Alabama, not Alabama politics. He's been a preacher and a religious man all of his life. He isn't fooled with politics, although he knows a lot of politicians. He's known a lot of them. Dr. Stegall, good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Steve. Known you a long time and appreciate you in every way.
Remember, we became friends when you were head of the Methodist Alabama Florida West Council as a young man in Troy years ago. I was in the legislature already, probably,
you
wasn't
really
it?
were. I was a district superintendent. Had 83 churches in southeast Alabama.
Dr. Stegall was born and raised in the Black Belt, y'all. Let's talk about your life experience, if you would, because you were the Methodist minister for a good many churches, but for over 40 years in the state of Alabama. Know a lot of people. A lot of people admire you and think a lot of you. But you certainly the last 23 or 4 years, you've been running at the First Methodist Church here in Montgomery.
That's correct.
That was your coup de grace, and you retired from there. But now let's start back where you were born over in Sumter County and
That's
go
correct.
through your childhood and everything, if you don't mind. Like you were born over there in Sumter County. I always tell people that whenever you want to hear a true Black Belt accent, you listen to Dr. Karl Stegall. You know, back in the old days, Karl, I could tell where someone was from, couldn't you?
You're right.
By their voice, because we all were Alabamians, and I could tell somebody from some Sand Mountain or somebody from the Black Belt. But go back to your childhood in the Black Belt. You were born out in the country around in Sumter County?
Yes, I was born in a little tiny town of ML. I always like to brag that I was the second smartest child in my class, so only two of us in my elementary school class. So I graduated from elementary school as salutatorian of my school.
There were only two people in your class?
Two people in my class. And
that wasn't a very hard job for a teacher, was it?
No, it wasn't. But my teacher ran off and got married while we were in elementary school, so we went to Livingston for high school. So I graduated from Livingston High School.
Well, you're such a sports fan and so knowledgeable about sports. Did you play sports at Livingston?
Yeah, I played in high school there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Football and basketball?
Yeah.
Because you're tall, too, you know.
Yeah, well, you can.
At that age, you know, I grew up at an age, if you were a pretty good athlete and tall and a good athlete, they made you play every sport.
Yes.
Whether you were any good or not. I played everything at Charles Henderson High School.
Well, you remember Pat Lindsay, I officiated his funeral down in Butler, and he and I graduated from high school the same year, and so did Zeke Smith over at Union Town that made All-American and all, but we were all in the same class at three different schools.
I would argue that Zeke Smith was one of the best football players ever played at Auburn.
No doubt about it.
He was first team All-American, everything.
Yeah, when they won the national championship, so that was a highlight in his life, it really was.
Now, where did he wind up spending his life?
Birmingham. He lived most of his life in Birmingham.
So Pat Lindsay and Zeke Smith and y'all all graduated Livingston together?
No, we all graduated from our high schools together. Pat went to Butler, Choctaw County High School. I went to Livingston High School, and Zeke went to Uniontown High School.
But now, did you go to Alabama undergraduate school?
Yes, I sure did.
I knew you loved Alabama.
Yeah.
Football, we see each other at Red Elephant clubs and everything. I knew you knew a lot about Alabama. So you went from Livingston to the University of Alabama?
Yes, I did.
At what point in time, Dr. Stegall, did you know you were going to be a minister?
Well, that's an interesting question. When I finished high school, my brother was the head basketball coach at Foley, and I took the job as the head basketball coach at the little town of Flomaton, right on the...
So you didn't know you were going to be a preacher?
That's right. And I became very active in the FCA and had an opportunity to go to the largest school in Kentucky to be on the staff there at DuPont Manual High School in Louisville, and they had two seminaries, so I was speaking more at FCA events and felt closer to going into the ministry, and I made the decision to go in the ministry and attended two seminaries there, and when I came out, I was appointed to Andalusia, so my first appointment was down in Andalusia.
You know, the So you started coaching at Flomaton. What were you, about 21 years old?
21 years old. I just turned 21.
And you got in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and then decided you were going to be a minister.
That's right.
So you had to go to seminary, though, didn't you?
Yes, I went to seminary in
Louisville.
Yeah.
You got your doctorate there at the same time?
No, I got my doctorate at Emory University in Decatur, Georgia, Atlanta area.
Did you preach some before you went back and got your doctorate?
Yes, I did. I started out in Andalusia, and I was on the staff as associate, and then I moved there to Bonifay, Florida, and then I came to Whitfield Memorial here in Montgomery, went on the Troy District, and then came back at First Methodist Church in Montgomery in 1983.
At what point did you get your doctorate, though? Did you leave one of those churches?
The last, in 1979.
Between Whitfield, before you went to Whitfield?
Yes.
So you went
while I was at Whitfield.
Okay. So you went first. You were associate pastor at Andalusia.
Yeah.
And then went to Bonifay, which was all in the West Council.
That's right.
You know, and then you went on to Whitfield Methodist.
Yeah, I did, and I did 6 years at Whitfield Memorial in Montgomery, and then I became a district superintendent. Had Troy, Eufaula, Phoenix City, and
when you and I met, you were doing that in Troy.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
But your reputation preceded you. I knew all about you and being in the legislature before we actually met.
You know, I think you went to our Alabama, that lunch club we had where Billy Rice was in there.
Yeah.
Remember we had Alabama, about 12 of us, Joe Falk and Billy Rice, and all went to the Alabama thing there in Troy. You joined that club with us, didn't you?
Yeah, I was a part of that some. Yeah.
Dr. Stegall, when you went to so when did you and Brenda meet?
We met when I was down at Flomaton. She lived there, and her father was on the Board of Education there, so that's where we met.
Was she an educator by profession?
Yeah, she went to University of Alabama, played in the $1 Million Band there, and
was she a major or played an instrument?
She played the trumpet. She played the instrument there.
So yeah, but y'all hadn't met in Alabama. Were y'all there at the same time?
No, she came after I did. She went there, but so we met after that.
While you were coaching at Flomaton, y'all met.
That's correct.
Uh-huh. Well, she's pretty.
Well, you're kind.
When did y'all take up tennis? Both of y'all are big tennis players.
Well, we used to play a lot. She was an excellent tennis player. I was not near as good as in the men's circuit as she was, but we started playing tennis, I guess, in the 1960s. She was a good tennis player at Alabama in intramural program, really was.
Uh-huh. So she grown up playing tennis,
yeah.
And you took it up after y'all got married.
Yeah. She was in the band. The last performance she was in was when Joe Namath tried to sneak over in the Orange
Texas
Bowl against Texas.
Uh-huh. She was there. She was singing.
She was playing in the band that night,
uh-huh.
And that was the last performance.
That was a heck of a ball game, wasn't it?
Really was.
If you look at it had a replay now there to show he went over the line, I believe.
Yeah, I've heard Coach Bryant say that. And Galen McCullough from Enterprise snapped the ball.
Uh-huh.
And he tells that story a lot about coming off the field and screaming, "We made it, Coach, we made it." And Coach Bryant said, "Son, it should have been so close there wasn't any question about it."
You know, we lived through that era with Bear Bryant and everything. He was a legend, wasn't he?
Yeah. You know, my favorite trivia question in this state of Alabama that has such love for football is, of all the teams that Coach Bryant coached against 2 or more times, there were only 2 teams that he never beat. You know what they were?
Texas was one of them, wasn't it?
Texas.
And let me think, was it Miami?
Alabama. He never beat Alabama.
Oh, when he was playing at Kentucky, coaching Kentucky and A&M.
Right. That's a very tricky question.
Yeah, it is, Karl, because but you know, I was talking to someone about Bryant the other day, and none of us ever thought anybody would surpass Bear Bryant, you know, what he had done. People now think Saban probably has. But people forget the dynasty that Bryant had accumulated at Maryland and Kentucky and Texas A&M, we had gone into a program that had completely was losing, 1-9, and made them 6-5 the next year with the same players.
That's right.
They went to Kentucky and took a 1-9 team and won the SEC championship. Then did the same thing at A&M.
It's amazing.
It was like Saban didn't have that preliminary
right.
success. Now he's got 6 or 7 national championships. I think his era in winning national championships is just as good. But Bryant, he would. It's like the old saying, he'd take yourn and beat mine, and mine and beat yourn. You know.
Well, it's amazing. You know, it's amazing that Alabama, the state of Alabama, has probably the 2 greatest coaches that ever lived in college football, and that's rather amazing. But Mal Moore told me something years ago that motivated a book that I've recently written, and that is, he said, if you dropped a pin in downtown Los Angeles and you drew a circle around that pin in downtown Los Angeles for 28 miles out, you would have far more people in that 28-mile circle than you have in the whole state of Alabama. And he said it's absolutely unbelievable, the accomplishments at the University of Alabama and Auburn in college football when you think about 5 million people or 6 million people, when they have more than that in downtown Los Angeles in a circle of 28 miles. And he used to say that over and over again.
You know, I just got through reading that comment in your book, which I think is probably one of the best books ever written on Alabama history, and An Amazing Alabama by Dr. Karl Stegall. He traveled the state, y'all, for about a year or two with he and his wife, Brendan, took some of his children and grandchildren. This has got the best stories about Alabama history, stuff that you and I have heard over the years. And you talk about that conversation you had with Mal Moore, and you talk about going up to North Carolina. You happen to be teaching at Duke at the minister's school there, or doing a seminary study or something, as a visiting lecturer, as a famous Methodist minister at Duke, which was founded as a Methodist school, I reckon it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Mal Moore was in the hospital up there, and you talk about visiting with him right before he passed away, and he's what mentioned that to you.
Yeah.
He told you that, mentioned that story.
He really did. Mal and I knew each other for a long time. I started out in Andalusia, which is 20-something miles from Dozier, and we did some things together. We went to Nashville together and took a tour of the Grand Ole Opry, Ryman Auditorium together, and we were friends for the years. But I was speaking up at Duke, and it's hard to believe he's been deceased now 10 years, but he died on March the 30th, 2013. And I was there and got up on Sunday morning, and I knew he was in the hospital, and I was going to be speaking that evening at Duke to a group of students, and I told Brendan, I said, I'm going to go by and see Mal. And I thought he would have been hooked up with IVs and lying on his back. I went by, he was reading the Durham paper. But he was waiting on a heart transplant.
Yeah.
And he told me that story about being if you drop the pin in Los Angeles. But he was encouraging in every way. He said, sit down. I thought I would go in there and just say hi and bye. And we talked a little bit, and he celebrated. He had just had a remarkable career in the number of national championships he was a part of in coaching, assistant coaching. And it was just something like 12 championships.
Your memory for Alabama football and every sport is amazing, and you cover a lot of it in the book, along with just intertwining it with the geography of the state and the beauty of each region and the people who hail from there. And it looked to me like you did it just from memory. Like you traveled to Limestone County, you traveled to Troy, you talk about Charles Henderson. It's almost as though you just knew this stuff from your lifetime of being in Alabama. But I bet you had a lot of great memories from 24 years as pastor of the great First Methodist Church there in Old Cloverdale, a legendary church, and you were a legendary pastor there. I like one of the stories about Red Blunt being, at one time Red Blunt was considered one of the richest men in the state and had jets, and nobody ever had them back then. Tell that story about when you went to the national championship Orange Bowl with him one time, and you were nervous about missing your sermon or something. Tell the story of that one.
Well, Red called me one day and he said, "Karl and I want you and Brenda to go with us to the Orange Bowl. Alabama's going to be playing Tom Brady in Michigan, and we really want you to go." And I said, "Red, I can't do it. It's on Saturday night, and I need to be back on Sunday morning." He said, "Well, let me tell you, I'll promise you I'll get you back." And so I said, "I still feel uncomfortable." He said, "No, I'll make sure. We'll have understanding with the pilot. We'll get out. We'll be back." And we get down there, and there was a family death in the family, and everything changed. And he called me in the middle of the night, and he said, "Karl, there's been a death in the family, and I'm not going to be able to get back, and we can't leave." And so I called Paul Duffy, retired bishop, who's living in Montgomery, and I told him, I woke him up, and I said, "You're going to need to speak for me this morning, because I can't get back from Miami." And he got up in the pulpit, and on WSFA, he announced that I could not get back from Miami because I'd been snowed in overnight.
I love that. Karl, can you imagine? I mean, I just read that book and I can't imagine. It's just stories I have heard, and very few of us remember about different parts of the state and what each town was known for and how it was built. But tell me some more people that would George Wallace go to your church at First Methodist?
George was a member of St. James at the time, but they sold the property to move east on Vaughn Road, and when they did, his daughter, Peggy Kennedy, who was married to Judge Mark Kennedy, they went out of church, and when he died, they did not have the sanctuary that sold it. And Peggy called me, and they wanted to have the service at First Methodist.
Did you do the eulogy?
No, I did. Lester Spencer did the eulogy. I was the first person to see George Wallace after he died outside the medical staff. Our daughter was working at the Jackson Hospital in public relations, and I happened to be at the hospital when George Wallace died. He died in room 221, and when I learned of his death, I went by the room, and I wrote in my book, it was sort of a strange feeling. When I walked in that room, he was a man I remembered that had spoken to large crowds all over the United States, and he was lying there silent, had died. And it was just an eerie feeling at that time. But I did participate in the service because they did not have a sanctuary over at St. James, and it was held at our church. It had a huge crowd.
Have you ever thought about or put any kind of number to how many folks you've buried and been the pastor for? Do you ever keep a diary on that?
Well, I had over 1,000 at First Methodist Church. I was there 23 and a half
years. You
years.
did keep a record of ones at First Methodist Church.
But
did the church have it, or had you kept a record of it?
Well, I've just through the years have written down the ones I've officiated. But that included, I've had 1,000 weddings and 1,000 funerals, but there are a lot of them that may not have always been at First Methodist. It might have been in West Alabama, could have been in Troy. And that's the same true about weddings. Sometimes weddings I had not only first weddings at church, but sometimes people would have private weddings in the sanctuary that lost their spouses. So that includes all of those for the 1,000.
You mentioned, when I see you sometimes at a social event or some political football event or something, you'll say, you called it all over the state. You say, when I was doing a sermon, a burial in Troy. You say, I remember that cemetery down there in Troy.
I've seen your marker at Troy today.
People think I'm dead. I've already got my marker up there and everything. I have people say, well, they look at me and say, it's real funny. I thought you were dead. Because I got that thing already ready. Anyway, but you do them all over the state. Tell me, let's hit a couple of spots. What were some of your best memories from the? Have we covered? Did you bury any other governors? Have you buried any other governors or eulogized any? I know a lot of governors have used you as their preacher and their confidant over the years. A lot of political figures.
He's only Governor Wilder was the only one where I had a part in the service.
Karl, I've written this over the years in my column. My observation of Alabama politics is the Methodist denomination is second in number to the Baptist, but it has dominated the political landscape. If you look at the history of numerous governors and our U.S. senators and our entire congressional delegation, when you and I were growing up, 9 out of 10 of them be Methodist. And I've noticed something over the years, too, that Methodist ministers' sons will succeed extremely well in business and politics. The one that comes to mind is Howell Heflin.
That's right.
Whose daddy was a Methodist minister. He used to always brag about his daddy being a Methodist minister. You know, you tell the story, you know, they used to move the Methodist minister around unless y'all became legends like you were, and John Ed, they let y'all stay at y'all's churches, but they used to move everybody around a whole lot. And so Methodist minister was there 3 or 4 years, so his daddy was a Methodist minister up there in the Quad Cities, and he said, well, he was embarrassed about being born in Georgia. He'd say, well, you know, my daddy was doing missionary work among the heathen over there in Georgia. Did you ever hear him say that? He'd say that often. But he was real proud of being a Methodist minister's son, and he would always talk about it, you know.
Oh, he did. He spoke for me 2 or 3 times, and he always told the same joke beforehand. He would say to people like Elizabeth Taylor's first 12 husbands, I'm not going to keep you long.
Exactly. He used that in Washington one time when old John Warner, who was one of the presidents, he and John Warner were over in Europe doing a military thing, both on the Armed Services Committee, and old Warner had been one of Elizabeth Taylor's husbands.
Yeah.
She had 9 or 10 husbands, and Warner took a long time. Well, Heflin said, well, I ain't going to tell you like Elizabeth Taylor told John Warner, I ain't going to keep you very long. He was the wittiest guy. He had the best wit about him.
I didn't know that.
I was just down at the farmer's market just now having lunch with 2 of the justices, Tommy Bryan and Sarah Stewart, and I told him that Heflin story about when he ran against Bill Cabinets, and he called him a Gucci shoe wearing, Rolex watch wearing, Kenny Bunkport Maine vacation, gray poupon mustard dipping Mercedes driving, Mountain Brook Republicans.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, tell me, hit real quick. We ain't got a whole lot of time left, but what area did you like one area better than the other of the state when you traveled?
Well, let me mention a couple of things. Being a product of the Black Belt.
Yeah, you liked going back.
You know, a lot has changed in the Black Belt over the years, but at one time it was so powerful politically in other ways. And it's almost unbelievable in a town like Marion, you had 4 colleges that were founded in Marion alone. You had MMI, you had Judson, you had Lincoln Memorial that became Alabama State, and you had Samford University.
Started in Marion?
All 4, plus they had a 5th seminary. So when you talk about Methodists, you think about colleges, it's almost unbelievable that you had, right down the road from Marion, you had Greensboro that had Southern University that merged to become Birmingham Southern. And then you had over in West Alabama, Sumter County, you had Livingston. But if you move over to Montgomery in the Black Belt, of course you had Tuskegee and you had Huntington College that came here in 1909. But the most amazing thing was Auburn University was founded in 1856 when the Methodists met in Greene County in Eutaw, Alabama, the Eutaw Methodist Church. And a man here, Dr. Blue, that was a leading member of First Methodist Church in Montgomery, led the charge to build, after they built Southern University, to build East Alabama Male College that became Auburn University.
So Auburn's derived from Methodist Church.
It's right.
Oh,
Yeah.
in the Black Belt.
That's right. But it's amazing, if you take from Tuscaloosa south of 50 miles all the way across the state, it's amazing how many colleges and universities came either out of the Black Belt or right on the edge of the Black Belt.
Well, that makes sense that the wealth was in the Black Belt when cotton was king, and so that's most of the literate people came from the Black Belt. The rest of the state were not quite as literate or erudite as the Black Belt people were, because the Black people, they come from Virginia, and they were used to having education. They were
Yeah.
well-educated people, so that would make sense. That would. Very few people would know that history, though.
Yeah.
How many colleges came from that area?
Well, you were asking me about places that stood out. Most of my life, when I'd go on vacation, in most Alabamans, they always go south. But I was really impressed when I was writing this book, and I would encourage people either today to take time out on weekends and go north. You don't see many waterfalls in the South Alabama, but if you go north, there's so much to see when you get up around Lake Gunnersville, as you get to Huntsville, if you get to Decatur, as you get over to Scottsboro, and you get into DeKalb County or Cherokee County with the canyon. I grew up 3 miles from Mississippi line, and going to see Mount Cheahaw is like going to see Mount Everest. I never, Mount Cheahaw is just completely foreign to Sumter County, you know. So I encourage people now when they go on vacations, go up to Rogersville and get on the charter boat and ride down the Tennessee River. We just love doing that. I was so impressed with that, and that was a new experience for me.
I want to reaffirm what you're saying. I've traveled the state a little bit, and if I were going to tell somebody where to go, it'd be that northeast part of Alabama where you just talked about Cheahaw and DeKalb and Scottsboro and Jackson County, especially in the fall.
That's right.
Karl, I remember a fall afternoon driving down one of those mountains. I said, Asheville, North Carolina ain't got a thing on us.
That's right.
They ain't got a thing on us. That's the prettiest part. I want you to come back again and let's talk more about the visit, about the tour of the state, if you can do that sometime.
I'd love to do that.
If you have time. Folks, our guest tonight has been legend in Alabama, Dr. Karl Stegall. He's written a wonderful book. I mean, someone who loves Alabama history like I do found this book just amazing, and it's called Amazing Alabama. Our guest has been Dr. Karl Stegall, the author of this book and one of the greatest men I've known in my life. We thank him for taking time out of his schedule and being with us tonight, and we thank you viewers for watching. Hope you tune again next week.